Hello, we've saved you a seat. Welcome to Train Station at 8, a video game music podcast wherein we take a single song and discuss it at length. Hopefully not long enough that you get bored, but we make no guarantees. This is episode 24, and today we're going to be talking about the theme of Rohan from the Lord of the Rings Online Riders of Rohan. Joining us for that today is, of course, my brother, Steven. Hello, Steven.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
I was gonna be clever and think of a quote from Rohan, but I couldn't remember one. So
Right now?
Sorry. right now.
Yeah, sure.
That one's easy to remember.
And also joining us today is someone more exciting than Steven, Jamie Christopherson, a composer of both film and video game music. Hello, Jamie. How you doing?
Hey, guys. How's it going? I'm doing great.
It is going great. So tell us and the audience just a little bit about yourself. Like, how would you sum up your composing career?
Well, I've been switching between, like you just mentioned, video games, film music. For the last about 15 years, I've been doing it professionally. I do some TV work, film trailers, commercials, but pretty much anything. You name it, I've done it.
Okay, have you done a commercial for cat food?
No, but I've done a commercial with cats in it.
All right.
Okay, that is close enough.
That's impressive.
Good
and I know your work, Jamie, from the Battle for Middle-earth games.
Yes.
Yes.
And I played Battle for Middle-earth 2 to death, so I've heard your music so darn much.
Nice.
Yeah, that's why I know those soundtracks.
I really, really enjoyed the work in that game just because it was so nice playing a Lord of the Rings game and hearing something other than just music from the movies. I thought that was a really cool touch.
So you could hear when the new stuff kicked in as opposed to the movie music?
Well, because I knew the movies well enough, I could tell when it was original, and something that surprised me, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, but the quality of the music was incredible, because I'd heard some like Star Wars games that tried to interject music with the film music, and it sounded really, really bad comparatively, but this stuff melded really well. So when I heard the original pieces, I'm like, wow, they put a lot of work into this game to get such good quality music to fit alongside the film music.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. You know, the first Battle for Middle-earth one, we had a full orchestra, like about 60-piece orchestra. So we were blessed totally with that, and that helps go a long way in obviously mimicking the sound of the film.
Oh yeah.
The second Battle for Middle-earth, we didn't have orchestra, so that was more challenging as far as making sure the synths sounded like the orchestra.
Exactly. Luckily, those are coming a pretty long way, so you're able to get a lot out of it.
Yeah, definitely. And we had a lot of vocals. Like I wrote a lot of themes for the elves and the dwarves and stuff. So a lot of vocal stuff and live vocals too. And so that always helps to add the authenticity.
Yeah, the dwarven music was fantastic. I also remember really liking Men of the West, I think it was.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, that's a good, rousing, soul-stirring sort of song.
only hope would they would be a little bit longer than they were.
Yeah, that was.
They were pretty short. That's true.
I think the reason it worked fairly well, at least in the context of the games, they tended to be pretty dynamic. Like they didn't just loop throughout the battle, but they'd like start when you started assaulting a castle or something. So it used to work fairly well.
Oh yeah, they worked great on their own for sure.
Mm-hmm. And you hear sound engineers and music composers say this all the time, but it's when you don't notice the sound going on is when it's the most effective. Even more so in this case, because you're actually hoping that everyone thinks this is just Howard Shore stuff. Like, you don't want them to recognize the fact that you were in this game at all, which is really interesting perspective to have, I guess.
Exactly. I've done that a bunch where I'm trying to mimic the sounds of other composers for franchise games. So,
Who do you think, just don't want to get too down a rabbit trail here, but what do you think is the hardest composer you've had to mimic?
The hardest composer I've had to mimic? Well, first of all, I don't even try and mimic John Williams. It's just, I don't know. It's, a lot of guys do, and they do a pretty decent job for some of those Star Wars games.
Yeah.
But for me, it's so iconic, and I'm trying to, the older and older I get, I'm trying to develop my own sound.
Right.
So I'm tending to not take on so many of these mimic jobs anymore.
Right.
So I'd say John Williams,
Okay.
I haven't had to mimic him yet, really, and I don't want to.
Don't even want to touch that one. Yeah,
At this
I definitely
point, I bet John
that.
Williams is scared of mimicking John Williams. I wonder if he's ever just like, I can't do it this time.
I'm sure he does think that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like trying to write Lord of the Rings fan fiction. You're just not going to sound like Tolkien. It doesn't matter who you are. It's just not going to work.
That's a good comparison. So
all this Lord of the Rings talk sure is thematic, isn't it, Bryan?
It is, but before we jump into discussing Lord of the Rings, I wanted to go through a quick segment here where we just discuss what we've been listening to lately.
That's a good idea.
Stephen, have you been listening to Lord of the Rings music lately?
Actually, no.
Shoot.
I'm kind of ashamed to admit that I only own one of the soundtracks from the films.
That's interesting.
I own Fellowship. It's the complete edition, but I don't have Return of the King, and I don't have. I almost called it The Empire Strikes Back. I don't own the Two Towers.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Is that stuff like downloadable on Amazon and all that?
It is, actually.
So you don't have a good excuse.
No, I have no excuse whatsoever.
All right.
And it's too bad because I think The Return of the King has some of the best music in the whole series.
Yeah, for sure.
But as for what I have been listening to, I've been listening to Radio Sega again, which I've mentioned a few times on the podcast, which just loops through pretty much every Sega song in the world.
So how do they get like super obscure?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like sometimes you'll run across the sound effects reel from the Typing of the Dead or something. It's
oh my gosh,
it gets pretty weird. But it's always fun because they also include things like CD and album releases of just Sega related music. So I actually discover a lot of interesting things I never even knew existed before, like the Puyo vocal track that came out in 2001 or whatever. And
everyone knows that.
Well, it's a mainstay, let's admit it.
Yeah.
But as someone who really likes the weird, obscure Sega Music Studio stuff, I can't get enough of that.
Awesome.
What about you, Bryan?
I'm listening to a ton of music. I've been listening to a little more of that Lindsey Sterling album.
Oh, good.
Yeah, which is always a lot of fun. And then I've been listening to Anamanaguchi's Endless Fantasy.
Oh, have you? Is this your first way through?
No, I've listened to it like 10 times or something.
Oh, yeah.
These are
best song.
I go back to
best song on the album, I still stand, is the
Cat
one about. Yep, it's the one about cats.
That one is really good, but I don't know. I kind of every time listening to a song in that album, I think it's the best one. So
that's fair.
And the only new thing I've been listening to is I've just started working through Mists of Pandaria in World of Warcraft. So I've heard the first couple tracks they play in that. It may not be surprising, but that game has absolutely fantastic music.
Do you think that it might be the best World of Warcraft expansion music-wise?
Yes, I'm fairly certain. It's really interesting because in the opening, I'm playing on the Horde. I don't know how it is on the Alliance, but basically in the opening of that game, you are assaulting Pandaria from the air, like war field. So or bombs going off everywhere. So they're really trying to hit home with 2 points. 1 point they're trying to hit home is the war that is going on, and they've done their most rousing warfare music yet by far. They're just crazy horns. It's almost like Medal of Honor-esque. It's like really gets into the battlefield type of fanfare that I have seen.
Did you know if that music? So that wouldn't play when you're the Alliance, though, right?
I have no idea. I'm guessing the Alliance also starts in a war, so maybe it would.
Okay. I'm just wondering, does it sound like
it sounds
Horde
like
style music?
Horde. It's not like the Orgrimmar theme, but there are definitely Horde overtones to it.
All right.
And then the second part that kind of plays is the peace and tranquility of this land you've discovered. That Eastern themed Pandaria music, and that's even better. It's fantastic stuff. So I really can't wait to hear where it goes as I progress. But I just got like an hour into it. Still in the first zone doing the initial quests. So
I think it's pretty cool that. Well, I think one of the reasons it kind of stands above the other expansions in my mind is that because they're able to focus on more of the really peaceful Eastern style music, I think they have more room to focus on melody as well.
Yeah.
There are less evil places, and video games especially tend to just kind of play horns over and over again when evil's happening.
Yes.
But when peace is happening, you get, like the Elven Teldrassil or something a little more musical, which is really nice.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's so far it's been very melodic, so I've been enjoying that a lot. And that about covers what I've been listening to. What about you, Jamie? Have you had any time to?
Nice. Yeah, that's one of the things. I haven't had too much time as far as I've been listening a lot to the ghost stories from Coldplay on the way to work.
Oh, okay.
That's cool. I like Coldplay.
I do like Coldplay. Besides that, I've been taking my daughter to these choir rehearsals, and so I've got all those songs running through my head. Just stuff like Castle in the Clouds from. So it's like, all this stuff that's influenced, by my life that I kind of have to do. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's really not leaving me much time to listen to my own stuff on my end. So.
Gotcha.
That's kind of a question I want to ask, because Bryan and I both like creating all kinds of stuff. Bryan is able to create music at this point, which is
nice,
amazing. And we've written stuff in the past. We make podcasts, but one weird difference between us has always been I like to go back and view or listen to old projects that I've made, and Bryan, you do that a lot less than me.
I do it quite a bit with music, but I don't tend to like listening to our old podcasts or read stuff I wrote all that often. That's true. I kind of just move on to the next thing.
With music, do you think you go back?
I do go back with music more often than my other stuff. Maybe because I like my output more. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just find it more interesting to go back to. But yeah, I'm guessing where you're leading there is like, Jamie, how often do you like to go back and listen to your old stuff?
The only reason why I do go back is when I'm doing demos for pitching for other projects. I got to go kind of back in, and then I'll get caught on some tracks that I've done a long time ago. And sometimes I'll be like, well, that's pretty cool. And most of the time it's like, no, it's not so cool.
Yeah. It's like every time you make a new project, it's like I've learned so much since that last thing that it's kind of hard to listen to.
Well, and I won't spend too much time on this because we ought to get to our special song of the week. But Bryan put together for a big project to really teach himself how to cover and compose songs. For my birthday, he did this big compilation of video game music of our favorite games of the past. And he had rarely worked on any music before this. And so he would make these maybe 1 to 2 minute versions of a song. There were like 12 of them or something. And every time he made a new one, the last one would be a little bit worse or unsatisfactory. So by the time he got to the end, it was sounding really good. But even in that 1 month period, his first song he wrote, he was no longer happy with.
Right.
And I'm amazed that you were able to fight the urge to go back
and re-record
everything and then go back again.
Well, the primary reason is I was on such a timeline that I literally finished it 2 days before your birthday. So
that's true.
I kind of couldn't. But yeah, it's tempting to go back now that I have better equipment and just re-record that whole thing. But there's also an importance to, keep making new stuff and don't get too caught up in the past.
I think there's a thin line between perfection and a good piece of music. Like
Yeah.
in our world, we're always under, like you just mentioned, deadlines. So the world that I'm in, I'm constantly up against deadlines, and a lot of the times I feel like that actually pushes me to be a better composer, to make sure that the ideas are streamlined. And it's not that I'm rushing projects. There's a thin line between rushing and having just enough time to finish it. And you're like, is this, once you get the theme kind of down, that's the most important thing. Yep. Once you get that down and you're composing, you just kind of got to go with your instinct.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And that timeline
himself.
Yeah, the timeline also had, like, when an idea just wasn't working, I just threw it out and went to the next instead of obsessing over it for hours. So it, like, it also forces you to move on from bad ideas instead of getting overly attached to them.
Yeah, that's true. Although one thing I've found is, yes, you got to weed out bad ideas, but if you follow an idea that you might think is bad, it can lead to a place that you didn't first think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So not to throw out an idea too quickly, like follow through with it, see if it goes somewhere.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, it's that difficult balance of knowing, just if it's kind of the instinct of knowing, is there a core here that I really want to work with, or am I just sticking with it because I feel obligated at this point?
Right.
So, all right. Well, moving on to our main topic here. Before we actually play the song for everyone, I wanted to discuss the game a little bit and our background with it, which is going to be pretty light this time because I don't think any of us have played it much. The game is The Lord of the Rings Online, Riders of Rohan. This was an MMO RPG released for the PC. This was an expansion, actually, to The Lord of the Rings Online, released in 2012, published and developed by Turbine, a.k.a. the people who make a billion MMOs. So, Stephen, our background in this, what is our experience with this game?
Well, one day we said, I like Lord of the Rings. Collectively, we said that. And we said, I like World of Warcraft as well. And then we created Hobbits and said, our computer doesn't run this very well.
Oh, man, that was
that's
a long
kind of
time
where
ago.
it ended. Yeah.
And that was not even Riders of Rohan. That was just base.
No, it wasn't nearly out yet.
Yeah. And
we did try again later on. And the game is enjoyable, but just, how many MMOs can you really keep in your diet at once? Even one is pushing it. I mean, Lord of the Rings Online just didn't capture us enough, despite the Lord of the Rings trappings.
No, absolutely.
And I'll have to admit, I didn't really notice the music when I played. So I'm going to assume there wasn't very much, or it wasn't that good. Because I tend to notice music in games. It's usually the first thing I latch onto.
You were the one who brought Theme of Rohan for this episode, so what led you to that song, given you don't really have a background at the game?
Two things. Firstly, I've been listening to a video game music podcast I just discovered called Battle Bards.
Right.
And they have a very strict theme to MMO music. They only talk about MMO music every week.
I would just talk about World of Warcraft every week on that.
Well, so would I. They do talk about that. It's a really, really good show.
Okay, quick aside. Have they ever done an Anarchy Online song?
Yes, they have.
Okay, cool. Give me that.
I'm guessing the answer is yes.
Okay.
If you ask about any MMO.
Right.
So that's kind of had The Lord of the Rings Online and MMOs in general bouncing around in my mind.
All right.
And then I knew we were going to have Jamie on the show this week. And I was looking at his catalog, and I'm like, well, the thing I always remember is a Lord of the Rings game. And I didn't just want to pick a track he composed, because we kind of try to avoid that. It's nice to get other perspectives. So I thought, well, what about a different Lord of the Rings game? And this is the one I remember that actually had, original music of its own. And I believe this song was composed by Chance Thomas.
Yes.
Look up what he has to say about the song.
No, I'm actually going to mention some of that before we go into the song, because he wrote a really good summary of it on his website, and I think that was really neat.
Yes, it's actually fascinating. And fun fact about Chance Thomas, unless I'm terribly mistaken, I think he composed the soundtrack to the Sierra Hobbit game.
Really?
Yes, he did, yes.
I love that game.
So long ago.
The music is really good as well, so that's just super cool.
That's neat.
So that's why I picked it.
All right.
Cool. Yeah, I think I was going to mention that. I'm actually friends with Chance. So.
Oh, really? I did not know that at all. Well, that makes it even better.
It's actually a pretty small video game music community.
I believe it.
At all these, all the conventions and the, things like that. Anytime we convene, there's always a few of us around, and we know each other pretty well.
Yeah, Chance's work in like library does remind me some of what of yours when he's worked with different licensed properties doing, orchestral stuff. So he's kind of in the same vein of your composition in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Hobbit stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I believe that he did the music for most of those games. And the thing that I always liked about his approach was it wasn't Howard Shore.
Yeah.
Like, I think he
had a very different sound.
He purposely went for a more ancient and raw kind of folksy sound,
Mm-hmm.
Which definitely worked well for a Hobbit game, because that grand, sweeping sort of sound wouldn't have worked.
That's actually... I'm really curious to go back and listening to the soundtrack from the Hobbit movie in isolation, because I can't remember anything about that soundtrack, and I'm curious how it sounds.
It did kind of fade into the background. I think the one thing I remember is the dwarven songs.
Right. Yeah.
Is that the one from the trailers?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that one.
So did you have any? I'm guessing not, but have you ever played any Lord of the Rings online, Jamie?
No, I have not. No, I barely played any of the Battle for Middle Earth. I mean, realistically, I just don't have time to really play games other than when I'm working on them and they have a build or something.
Right.
I get to play them. I only really get to do about between 1 and 3 games a year. I get to kind of play a few hours here and there.
That's cool. Yeah.
So I get one more important thing that we ought to briefly go over before we really start talking about it is just Lord of the Rings in general.
Oh, sure.
Because if you read Chance's post about the song, there's so much thought and history he put into it.
Yes.
And it enhances it a lot if you know the Lord of the Rings lore. For my part, I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I've read the books many times. I also love the movies.
So are you really a Lord of the Rings
fan? I'm not okay. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, not an intellectual Lord of the Rings fan.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. And I've played many of the games and whatnot. So I definitely come from a Lord of the Rings-centric background. And you're the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But Jamie, what about you? Books, movies, nothing?
The Lord of the Ring, the original trilogy, I definitely loved those.
Right.
I never read the books, and I haven't seen the Hobbit movies yet, sadly to say.
Oh, that's fair enough. I actually don't really like the Hobbit movies, so that's
you saw the good ones.
Yeah.
All right. So our background in the game is extremely light, but hey, we don't need to know about something to talk about it. When it's that set as a rule.
We're podcasters.
We're talking about music here, by the way.
Exactly.
We know about music, or one of us does at least. All right. So moving on to the song itself, the theme of Rohan. We're going to play it here in a second, but I just wanted to go over this a bit real quick. It was composed by Chance Thomas, who we've already talked about a bit. He's done a lot of different stuff: The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars Monopoly. That was probably the highlight of his career.
Peak of his career, yes.
Weirdly enough, he does mention it a lot on his website, so he was happy to work on that.
You know what? That's a pretty cool thing to have worked on.
I remember playing it a little bit back in the day. I had no idea it was composed by him.
And his score for the King Kong game was really good, by the way.
Yes, I was going to mention that one as well.
Man,
I loved that game, and superb score. So to talk a bit about the song, instead of introducing it myself, I was just going to run through kind of his remarks on it and kind of paraphrase those. He wrote up a little piece on his website describing what his thought process was for writing this piece. The big elephant in the room for him was the fact that Howard Shore had already done a theme for Rohan, and he loved it. And then he was tasked 10 years later with writing his own theme for Rohan that couldn't be Howard Shore's because this was a different vision of Lord of the Rings. It wasn't tied in the movies. So he had to come up with something on his own. So he decided to focus on broader definitions of Rohan, go for a lot of the overarching and underlying themes. That some of the things he jumped to is that it was a nation in decline, that it was simmering an all-out war. He wanted to focus on the Anglo-Saxon and medieval overtones and the hardy but weary people that made up its citizens. So he was trying to draw from a lot of different sources. He also, in doing that, tried to use a lot of different instruments. He used classical violin played in a Celtic fiddle style. He used a European whistle, a bass recorder. He basically tried to get instruments that reflected those medieval and those Anglo-Saxon themes. So he drew from a lot of different inspirations for that. Some other interesting notes he made about his piece is that he started the song off in minor before changing it up a little because he wanted to really get that somber nation in decline feel early on. And then even when he switched to major ending the song, he made it kind of a weak resolve with uncertainty there. So he was putting a lot of thought into getting those themes into every bit of the song. And I'm going to end this little summary with actually just his final paragraph of his summary, which was as follows. These ample cultural tie-ins and musical devices are certainly geeky, but they're meaningless if the tune fails to transport Lord of the Rings Online players to the Rohan of their imaginations while playing the game. Ultimately, this is the test of all thematic music, a test which I hope to desperately pass. Time and taste will tell if I rose to triumph or fell in ruin in my quest to hit the mark. So that was basically what he had to say about the piece, and without any further notes of my own, let's go ahead and play it. Are we all sad now?
Bravo. Very, very somber.
Yeah, that ending I quite like. So any initial thoughts on this piece?
Well, I would say first off, I listened to it before reading that bit by Chance Thomas.
Right, me too.
and it added so much to the song
Mm-hmm.
once I heard what he had to say. I think I liked it a lot more when I started to think about it.
Yeah.
But my initial response to the song was the feeling that it was tired but determined.
Yeah.
And it feels beaten down. It feels like
You
it's
might
trying
say
to be...
hardy but weary.
Yeah, and then I read that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I thought. It's amazing he was able to capture that emotion so vividly. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's almost this exhaustion in the final chorus that just kind of fades out instead of really, it's not some complete bombastic ending.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. I mean, it's been an interesting episode for me to take notes and compare on, because a lot of the things that I feel we would normally pick out, which is, instrument choices, switching between major and minor, a lot of the things that we would normally find from a song, he just explained, so I don't really need to pick it out.
Yeah, exactly.
So I kind of thought of it in different ideas than that. I mean, the first obvious question that comes up to me is, what do you think of this compared to the movie Rohan theme?
Jamie, are you familiar with that song at all?
I have to re-listen. I remember, just like Chance mentioned, is that I was very struck by that theme when I heard it in the movies originally. I mean, it just captured the mood so well.
Absolutely.
And
I am familiar with that, but I haven't heard it in a few years. But yeah, I just remember the feeling was so great, especially tied to the visuals from that original song. So I could totally get why he was so daunted by this task of having to redo a theme that was already almost perfect.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it was definitely a line that he walked. You can hear the similarities between even the rhythm of those songs.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like you have it's maybe more notes in quicker succession in the movie.
Oh,
kind of has that dun 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 dun, and this one spends more time going dun 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 dun.
Yep.
And it feels sadder in this version.
Yes, I think that sense of loss he focuses on much more. I think the movie focused more on the rising hope, especially just with how it was used in the charge and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that really fits the expansion as well, because the way they positioned it was you're entering a kingdom in flames. The king is doing absolutely nothing to stop the Wormtongue, his evil advisor's machinations. And as a player, you're going to have to do a lot of fighting and battling and riding on horses, and it's kind of a big mess.
One thing I was curious about is where this plays exactly, because how the piece is paced could work very well just walking around an environment in an MMO.
Particularly the middle section.
Yes, because it's melodic, but it's not in your face. So I could really imagine it just like, playing when you come to the capital or something like in World of Warcraft. But I don't actually know where it plays.
Yeah, so you've seen it in the game then?
I have not. I'm just guessing.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's what I'm wondering, because I haven't actually seen where it plays in the game, so I became curious on like how they used it, because I know how World of Warcraft uses its music, but I haven't played a lot of Lord of the Rings Online.
And it really is helpful that Chance is able to point out all the different instruments he uses.
Mm-hmm.
And Jamie, as someone who's probably a little more well-versed in instrumentation and the choices a composer have to choose, what do you think about the choices that Chance went with.
Yeah, this thing is like, about this ancient music and it's a fantasy game, number one, but trying to set it in a kind of an old Anglo-Saxon kind of sound. Mm-hmm. There are certain instruments, and he hit upon those: the European whistle, the pipes, and things like that. And we as composers are always trying to find these things are in our minds authentic, and they don't have to really be authentically authentic from the region. They just have to kind of pretend to be authentic. They
have to remind you of that. They have to make the listener think it comes from that era, even if they don't actually come from that era.
Exactly.
And that's a good point, because you hear those very ancient sounding Celtic instruments, and you feel like, well, surely this is what the Rohan people play in their great halls. And it's like, no, the composition, they probably didn't even have, they had like a lute and a guy who sang or something. Like,
exactly. They maybe had a quarter of that. I mean, yeah, you're talking about a fantasy play, especially in fantasy music. Like, yes, it reminds us of England, and but this is an imaginary place, Mm-hmm. So what are their instrumentation? What do they sound like? So in a way, it's kind of freeing. Like you can experiment with that and try and come up with something fresh. And so I think.
Do you ever hear a fantasy soundtrack that takes you out of the moment just because it sounds too modern? It's using instruments or I don't know, musical motifs that sound straight. Soundtrack? Yeah, I kind of like the Wheel of Time soundtrack. If you've ever heard that, but because every once in a while, a fantasy series for me will just kind of lose it, because it feels like this is something that would be happening in my world, not some ancient land.
Right.
Yeah, I could see that problem with kind of a more Hans Zimmer style fantasy that gets too into the the tense orchestra. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, the electronics and
yeah. I would love to hear like a fantasy universe that used electronic music, but that was like part of the world, like a fantasy universe with tons of technology. That would be kind of neat.
Well, you have, like, you look to Guild Wars.
Yeah.
At least Guild Wars 2. They have robots, essentially.
But that goes like super far and almost classical music. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, like, for example, like I also write some music for, a game called Blade and Soul, which is another MMO based out of Korea, and the same guys that do Lineage.
Right.
And last year I wrote 3 like heavy metal songs for them.
Oh, nice.
And it's a fantasy game. 90% of their music is fantasy based, but then they have once in a while these random tracks to kind of throw listeners through, a curveball.
Right. For recording that, did you like have a band you worked with, or what did you?
No, it was basically a lot of the same guys that I worked with on the Metal Gear Rising soundtrack. So it was kind of a hodgepodge of a few guitarists and vocalists and things like that. And I put together bands.
Oh, gotcha.
That's cool.
Oh yeah, well, that was the same publisher as Guild Wars. Interesting. And Lineage. So is it NCSoft?
NCSoft, yeah.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
So maybe you'll be writing Guild Wars music at some point.
You never know.
Yep.
But, Guild Wars has a beautiful soundtrack. Oh, go ahead.
Definitely. But yeah. So once in a while, you can get outside of the normal fantasy type of sounds. But like you were mentioning, it can take you out of it or put you in a modern kind of feel. So it's a thin line between getting a cool fantasy sound, but also coming up with something fresh.
Yes.
And the Lord of the Rings is so daunting for that, because man, is that world slow paced and grounded. And you read the Lord of the Rings books, it has this old style of speaking even.
Yeah, it's one of the most like straight historical fantasies. Like, it does not play around with crazy ideas.
Even the magic is really subdued and just hinted at most of the time. You speak about Korean RPGs. The Eastern way is so much more often willing to go modern. So many Japanese RPGs have, J-pop or like rock guitars or whatever you can think of.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings is the direct opposite of that, to the point where in the movies, I don't remember if this ended up in the theatrical release or not, but you had the scene where Éowyn is singing the funeral dirge.
That was not in the theatrical release, yeah.
And that, they weren't even trying to go for something that sounds like pleasant or modern to our ears. That was just no backing strings or anything, just one human being singing this traditional song.
Yeah.
I would actually love for a few of those to make it into the game at some point in Lord of the Rings Online. I don't know where you'd put it, but something that really feels like the characters, the people who live in this world, like this is the music they listen to.
Yeah.
Right.
It can be jarring in a really interesting way.
Yeah, I do love it when games create that in-world music. Skyrim dabbled in it a little bit, and a few other games have. And it's just a really different perspective. Because like we've discussed, the music that's actually in that world is very different than the music we write for it, because they have two different purposes. So you mentioned earlier that interlude between the choruses, where it kind of it plays that flute. I found that part a little meandering, and I can't decide if it was a good kind of meandering or not. Like, what were your thoughts on that?
Interesting that you should mention that. Because when the first... The song opens with the main...
It opens with the
theme.
chorus, it plays the chorus again with a slightly higher key, and then it goes into the interlude.
And then once it did that, I initially felt disappointed.
Yeah.
Because I thought the song was going to go to all these different places, and it was just going to keep rising and falling until a crescendo would happen. But it's kind of, if you'll pardon the horse-related pun, a one-trick pony.
All right.
In the sense that it's got that one tune.
Yep.
And it pretty much just plays that over and over again. And that's it doesn't really have anything else going for it. And it's kind of a fault of the movie, maybe. I love the Rohan theme, but they just overplayed that to death.
Well, Howard Shore was a very, very big fan of motifs. One could argue too much. Like the Isengard theme would just play every time you see an orc. And he had really, really strong themes, but they came back maybe one too many times, especially when you then hear them in video games and hear them in trailers and hear them outside of the movie. They start to, repeat a little. And that's definitely something present in this song.
So I actually agree with you. It sounds a bit meandering. It's you kind of just want to get to the end. Mm-hmm. But if this does play in the game, that is exactly what you want to hear as you're talking to NPCs or trading items with players or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think it's a different ball game once you're assuming this isn't just like title screen music or whatever.
And I don't necessarily think that dropping it down to something more slow and less directly melodic is a bad idea. I just never really, the melody he chose never really gelled with me. It always seemed to just go in a place that didn't make sense in my head.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I don't have a problem with it getting quiet. I don't think the whole thing should just be a rising sequence of the same motif. Mm-hmm. But it did feel a bit like there wasn't much there, kind of grasping at straws almost.
Yeah. And he could have totally had like direction behind this that I'm not seeing yet on 3 listens, but it's a part that didn't necessarily didn't gel with me that well.
Yeah, and I think I've liked it more as I've listened to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good song.
Definitely. I mean, and the good thing is, I don't think you can get the Lord of the Rings online soundtrack.
That's not a good thing.
Oh, really?
But unless I'm mistaken.
All right. I'll look that up.
But you can get the Riders of Rohan soundtrack.
So you can get the expansion soundtrack, but not the original.
As far as I know, I've only briefly looked.
All right.
But at least on Amazon.
Well, it's coming on Amazon as Riders of Rohan as the first search. That's interesting. Yeah.
Is there any other random question? Is there any other films that it kind of reminded you guys? Something it reminded me of.
Not off the top of my head. What does it remind you of?
It reminded me a little bit of Pirates.
that was like the first comment on YouTube, and I'm like, interesting. I didn't hear that. So like, what are you talking about? Like the main theme of Pirates?
The yeah, da da dun da da dun da da dun da da.
Oh,
the original, but a very very slowed down version. It just kind of hinted at it.
No, I'm seeing it now. You're actually
Which
right.
in turn means it also reminds me of Elder Scrolls.
Right, because the Elder Scrolls theme has the same tune. Man, this is a popular...
But this is, one of the things that it's so hard to get away from certain melody and harmonic structures sometimes. So
I think just that rising three notes, and then falling is just so... It's really good. I mean, let's be honest, the Pirates theme and the Elder Scrolls theme are fantastic.
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
And all for different reasons. So yeah, you're right. It's kind of using that same song structure again in a different context. But it's so slowed down that, I can definitely hear like Morrowind's theme in this now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. That's cool.
It does make me wonder if the Lord of the Rings Online guys plan to make any more culture-focused expansion packs.
What has been the most recent one? Is this the most recent?
I don't actually know. I know there was a Moria. There was a Moria expansion.
I think there was Mirkwood and Moria. I think both of those were before, but I'm not positive. I'm looking that up now.
And I'm not really familiar with those, including the music, but this was so centered on the people of Rohan that I wonder if they could do something for Gondor in the future.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I would really like to see it. Yeah, the last expansion was Helm's Deep, so it's kind of a continuation of this one.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
like the
interesting.
glittering caves and Helm's Deep.
You know what would be really neat is if they pulled like a World of Warcraft and how they did with Pandaria, they like made this peaceful people the whole focus of the expansion. It'd be really cool to do like a Shire expansion.
I mean, the Shire's already in there, but...
Yeah, but, I guess you couldn't even go to Rohan before this.
I mean, you could make like a Scourging of the Shire expansion where, Saruman comes back and ruins everything and you're questing around there to stop him.
That would be a bummer. But that's actually a good point. I was about to say you couldn't do that because that's not canonical. But this doesn't follow the movie canon, does it?
That was a really interesting, and one of the major differences from the book and the movies is, in the movies, Saruman died, he just fell off his tower and died.
Well, he was stabbed by Wormtongue, right?
But in the books, they went there, and he escaped, and went back to the Shire before the Hobbits got back, and basically took everything over there, and made the Hobbits his slaves, basically. And then Frodo came back and fixed everything at the very end of the book. But apparently the movies didn't need an 8th ending to Return of the King, so they decided to not put that in.
I understand that decision.
But that would be an interesting place for Lord of the Rings Online to go because it's not tied to the movies, like you said. So, but that would be at the very end. I don't think they've finished their storyline yet.
And a lot of the best Lord of the Rings games tend to be the ones that aren't, based after a movie. Or following the movie.
Like the SNES one?
Other ones
it did have
that
a great
are not
theme song. You got to give it that.
That's true. Yeah, we should link to that or play that.
How many Lord of the Rings games have there been now? I don't know.
Quite a few. There was one for Return of the King and Fellowship of the Ring. All those movies got this weird variation of like, here's a Game Boy Advance game, here's a GameCube game.
Yeah, well, there's one, I don't know if you've heard of, Jamie, Battle for Middle-earth. That was a Lord of the Rings game.
Yeah, that was a game. There were a couple of those.
Or a few of those. But no, there was also...
Just 2 of them.
Yeah, there were 2 of those and an expansion. Let's see, what else was there? There was, the Third Age RPG, which
wasn't actually that bad.
No, there was the Third Age strategy game for the Game Boy Advance. There was like the...
And of course there's been the Lego game, which is really good.
Oh yeah, the Lego game, definitely.
That was fantastic.
I love all the Lego game stuff. Those are fun.
Yes.
See, those are games that I get to play because, I got a daughter now, so...
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's a good excuse.
Yeah, and it's great. As she starts getting older, I get to start playing video games a little more because it's bonding time. So, yes.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I thought Lord of the Rings Online is maybe my favorite Lego game. The humor they used. At first I was like, I don't know about, using quotes from the movie. That would be awkward. But man, did they use that humor well. Because they merged direct, literal, like, sound clips from the movie with visual humor. And that made it amazing. But that's neither here nor there in terms of this song. Is there any we covered a lot of this. Any like final thoughts you had about the music that we haven't thought about yet, or?
No, I think we covered everything from this. I like I love the sound of the violin that he got. I believe it's played by a girl named Taylor Davis.
Yes.
Who's actually doing a lot of game stuff, and I think she plays in that band that Jason Hayes has going, the Critical Hit.
Oh, really?
Oh, that's where I heard her from. Like, that name sounds familiar.
That's super awesome. I did not realize that connection. All right.
That's really
like
cool.
I said, it's a small community.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many
kidding.
webs we're going to uncover.
Well, that's a cool tie-in.
I guess my closing thought would be, I'm not like in love with the melody of this song.
No.
I like it. I think it does its job. I don't think it's particularly memorable. And the middle section is still, I think, fine for an MMO town, but on its own lacks direction. Yeah. But all of the choices on how this song feels, the instruments chosen, the emotion you can hear in it, the way it's played, the respect for not only the source material of Lord of the Rings, but the just video game music, how this is something that's representing MMOs right now. All of that makes me very happy and really, really like
Yeah,
this song.
it's one of those songs that's greater than the sum of its parts. Like, if you just look at the melody or just look at how it's structured, it may not seem that great. It may not. That's an interesting word I just created. But the how, if you're just listening to it for the feel and the emotion on a broad top level, it's amazing. And in a way, that's the most important part of music.
Absolutely true. And it's also something that you need in an MMO, because
broad sweeps are very important for MMOs. Just like invoke this feeling of this place. That is your number one job. And he does that in spades with this. So,
and I think if one of the good pointers about a good piece of music is, if you listen to this, let's say you did play the game for like 2 years and you heard it in the game situations, then you're hearing that outside the game. Does it, want you to start playing the game again?
Yes.
Bring back all the memories and have people start picking it up. That's like the ultimate compliment right there.
Absolutely.
That is a very good point.
With us not having played the game, we don't really know.
No.
Does this piece of music want you to, go play the game and find out where it came from in the game?
Yeah.
For me, without a doubt, I am more interested than ever to pick up Lord of the Rings Online if only I could find the time. Yes, it's like I respect this song just listening to it out of its place, which is a really good sign.
Yep. All right,
cool.
Well, that covers that. So
thank you, guys.
Absolutely, thank you for coming, Jamie. That was a lot of fun, and it was just awesome getting your perspective on all this.
Yeah, great.
So
thanks for having me, and I had a great time.
Yeah, super. Just as a quick outro, any projects you want to plug or places you want people to find you on the internets?
On the internets, just my website, www.jamiechristopherson.com.
Alrighty.
And that's about it. I've got a few projects in the works, but they make you to sign these NDAs and
those pesky things.
Well, we don't want you getting fired on our behalf, so we'll
yeah, that'd be a bummer.
Like I said, I did do some recent work on the first game I got started on called Lineage 2, and
neat.
I don't know if they really people in the US play that game too much, but in Asia it's pretty popular, I think, still.
All right, well, we'll work on growing our Asia listener base sometime.
There you go.
And also, just for the website, what's the spelling for that?
JamiecHristopherson.
Awesome. Alrighty then. And for our part, you can follow me on Twitter at Lord Meldor, or Steven on Twitter at Emblem180. You can write us in with the email.
Wait, that's actually not my Twitter
account.
You're
right. It's not. What is it? Steven Kelly 180?
No, we've only plugged my Twitter account on shows.
Well, no,
for the past
it was confusing
5 years.
because last time we talked about the origin, which was the Emblem
Oh, yeah. It's Stephen Kelly
Yeah,
180.
I don't know who Implement 180 is, but follow them too, just for the heck of it. All right, if you want to write us with emails, you can at trainstation8@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter at trainstation8. We also have a pretty active Facebook page, so look for us there.
Getting more active. We're doing Song of the Day now, so every day we have a new song pulled from one of our brains, just to entertain you.
Is that on Twitter and Facebook?
Yes, it is on
Okay,
both
cool.
right now.
And you can also find us on iTunes and leave us reviews there. Those are awesome. Those are like the most valuable thing you can do for our show. So please do that if you like it. And Train Station 8 is a part of the Whales Are Whales network, a place where you can find different shows like this with people like us. Just check out whalesorewhales.com. And that is all. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And until next week, say goodbye to the monkey porter.